Have you ever wondered what happens in empty buildings when everyone goes home? What lurks in the shadows when no human eyes are watching? This chilling true story will make you question everything you thought you knew about security cameras and the supernatural world that exists just beyond our perception. When Mark, a security guard at a corporate office building in downtown Chicago, started his night shift, he expected the usual routine of monitoring empty hallways and vacant offices. But what the security cameras captured during those late-night hours would forever change his understanding of reality. This isn't just another ghost story. This is documented paranormal activity recorded by multiple high-definition security cameras, creating undeniable evidence of supernatural forces at work. Watch as we reveal the terrifying footage that security personnel around the world have been too scared to share publicly. From objects moving on their own to mysterious figures appearing in locked rooms, these recordings prove that some places never truly empty, even when all the employees have gone home for the night. Hit that like button if this story gives you chills. Subscribe for more documented paranormal encounters, and don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss our latest supernatural investigations. Comment below if you've ever experienced something unexplainable while working alone at night. Security camera paranormal activity has become one of the most compelling forms of supernatural evidence in recent years. Unlike eyewitness accounts that can be dismissed as imagination or hallucination, digital recordings provide concrete proof that something beyond our understanding is happening in the spaces we consider safe and familiar. These documented encounters challenge our perception of reality and force us to confront the possibility that we are never truly alone, even in the most secure and monitored environments. The psychological impact of witnessing paranormal activity through security footage is particularly intense because cameras are designed to show us objective truth. When that truth includes impossible phenomena, doors opening by themselves, shadows moving independently, objects levitating, it creates a cognitive dissonance that can be deeply disturbing. This story explores not just the supernatural events themselves, but the profound effect they have on those who witness them through the unblinking eye of surveillance technology. Paranormal activity, security camera ghost, caught on camera, supernatural footage, ghost stories, paranormal evidence, haunted building, security guard horror, documented paranormal, supernatural surveillance, ghost sighting, paranormal investigation, horror stories, true ghost stories, paranormal encounter. 4. Tags, video tag list. Paranormal activity, security camera ghost, caught on camera, supernatural footage, ghost stories, paranormal evidence, haunted building, security guard horror, documented paranormal, supernatural surveillance, ghost sighting, paranormal investigation, horror stories, true ghost stories, paranormal encounter, security camera paranormal, office ghost, workplace haunting, supernatural security footage, paranormal documentation, ghost caught on tape, supernatural evidence, paranormal proof, haunted workplace, security footage ghost 5. Video script, part 1 of 2. The security monitors went completely black at exactly 3:33 a.m., and when they flickered back to life 30 seconds later, there was someone standing in the lobby who had never walked through the front door. My name is Mark, and I've been working as a security guard for over 15 years. I've seen a lot of weird things during late-night shifts, but nothing prepared me for what I witnessed at the Meridian Corporate Center in downtown Chicago. What I'm about to tell you isn't just my word against the darkness. Every single moment was captured by high-definition security cameras, creating the most compelling paranormal evidence I've ever encountered. Let me know in the comments if you've ever experienced something unexplainable while working alone at night, because after what happened to me, I realized that we're never truly alone in these empty buildings. It was a Tuesday night in October when I started my shift at the Meridian building. The 24-story glass tower housed several major corporations, and by 6 p.m., it was supposed to be completely empty, except for me. I'd been working this particular building for about 8 months, and the routine was always the same. Patrol each floor every 2 hours, monitor the security cameras from my desk in the lobby, and make sure nobody unauthorized tried to get inside. The Meridian building had one of the most advanced security systems I'd ever worked with. 48 high-definition cameras covered every hallway, elevator, stairwell, and common area. The system could detect motion as subtle as a piece of paper falling to the floor, and it automatically recorded everything to digital storage that kept footage for 90 days. These weren't cheap convenience store cameras. These were professional-grade surveillance devices that captured everything in crystal-clear detail. That night started like any other. I did my initial walkthrough of the building at 7 p.m., checking that all the offices were locked and empty. The cleaning crew had finished their work by 5:30, and the last employee had badged out at 6:15. According to the electronic access logs, I was the only person in the entire building. Hit the like button if this story is already giving you chills, because it only gets more terrifying from here. Around 9 p.m., I settled into my desk in the lobby to monitor the camera feeds. The security station had 6 large monitors that cycled through different camera views every 10 seconds, plus I could manually select any specific camera if I needed to investigate something. For the first few hours, everything was perfectly normal. Empty hallways, vacant offices, nothing moving except the occasional plant swaying from the building's ventilation system. But at 11:47 p.m., camera 12 on the 15th floor detected motion. I immediately switched to manual view and focused on that camera. It showed the main hallway of the 15th floor, which housed an accounting firm called Henderson and Associates. The hallway was completely empty, well lit by emergency lighting, and absolutely still. I stared at the monitor for about 5 minutes, but nothing moved. Motion detectors can be sensitive, I told myself. Maybe it was just a shadow from a passing car outside creating a light change that triggered the sensor. I made a note in my log and went back to the rotating camera feeds. 20 minutes later, the same camera detected motion again. This time, when I switched to the 15th floor view, I saw something that made my blood run cold. At the far end of the hallway, near the emergency exit, one of the office doors was standing wide open. I knew for certain that door had been closed during my 7 p.m. walkthrough because I personally checked every single door on every single floor. Comment below what you think was really happening here, because what I discovered next defied all logical explanation. I grabbed my flashlight and headed to the elevator. The ride to the 15th floor felt longer than usual, and I noticed my hands were slightly shaking as I pressed the button. I kept telling myself there had to be a rational explanation. Maybe the cleaning crew had missed locking one door properly. Maybe the building's settling had caused a poorly latched door to swing open. Maybe the door had been ajar all along and I just hadn't noticed it during my walkthrough. When the elevator doors opened on the 15th floor, the hallway was exactly as I'd seen it on the camera. The door to Henderson and Associates' conference room was standing wide open, casting a rectangle of darkness into the well-lit corridor. I approached slowly, my footsteps echoing off the polished floors. The conference room was empty. 20 chairs around a long wooden table, a whiteboard on the wall, nothing out of place. But the air felt different somehow, colder than the rest of the building, with an almost electric quality that made the hair on my arms stand up. I checked the door frame and lock mechanism. Everything appeared normal. No signs of forced entry or mechanical failure. I pulled the door closed firmly, heard the lock click into place, and tested it twice to make sure it was secure. Then I went back downstairs to my security station, making a note in my log about checking the door. On the elevator ride down, I decided to review the camera footage from the 15th floor to see exactly when that door had opened. The security system stored everything digitally, and I could access any recorded footage from the past several days. I was determined to solve this mystery with technology and logic. Back at my desk, I pulled up the recorded footage from camera 12 starting from 11:30 p.m. I watched myself doing my walkthrough at 7 p.m., confirming that the conference room door was indeed closed. I fast-forwarded through the next few hours. Empty hallway, nothing moving, no changes. Then, at exactly 11:47 p.m., I watched something impossible happen. The door didn't swing open gradually like it would if the lock had failed or the building had settled. The door didn't move at all for several seconds after the motion detection triggered. Instead, there was a brief moment where the camera seemed to flicker, just a split second of visual distortion, and when the image stabilized, the door was standing wide open. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. In the recorded footage, I could see a shadow moving inside the conference room. Not the shadow of someone walking around, but a shadow that seemed to move independently, flowing across the walls and ceiling like liquid darkness. The shadow appeared for maybe 3 or 4 seconds before the recording returned to showing an empty room with an open door. Subscribe for more terrifying true stories like this one, because what happened next convinced me that some things can't be explained by security protocols or building maintenance. I watched that segment of footage at least 20 times, analyzing every frame. The timestamp was continuous. No gaps in the recording that would indicate tampering. The motion detection had triggered at the exact moment the shadow appeared, which meant the camera system had detected something moving in that room. But according to the building's access logs, I was still the only person inside the entire Meridian building. I decided to go back up to the 15th floor and check that door again, But first I did something I'd never done before in all my years as a security guard. I called my supervisor. "Hey Jim, it's Mark at the Meridian building," I said when he answered. "I've got a situation here that I need to document properly. One of the doors on 15 keeps opening on its own, and the camera footage is showing some anomalies. I think we might have a security system malfunction." Jim had been in the security business for over 20 years, and he took equipment malfunctions seriously. "What kind of anomalies?" he asked. I described what I'd seen in the footage, being careful to stick to technical terms. I mentioned the visual distortion, the motion detection triggers, and the fact that the door appeared to open without any visible cause. I didn't mention the shadow. That seemed too far outside the realm of normal security reports. "Send me that footage," Jim said. "I'll have our tech team look at it tomorrow. In the meantime, if that door opens again, prop something against it and continue your normal rounds. Could be a problem with the magnetic locks." After ending the call, I felt slightly better. Technical malfunctions made sense. Security systems were complex, and sometimes they glitched in ways that created false readings or visual artifacts. Maybe the shadow I'd seen was just compression distortion in the digital recording. Let me know in the comments if you've experienced similar unexplainable events at your workplace, because I was about to discover that this was just the beginning. At 1:15 a.m., I went back up to the 15th floor to check the conference room door. It was still securely closed exactly as I'd left it, but as I stood in that hallway, testing the door handle one more time, I heard something that made my heart skip a beat. From inside the conference room came the unmistakable sound of chair legs scraping against the floor. I froze, my hand still on the door handle, listening intently. The sound came again, definitely a chair being moved across the hard floor. Someone was inside that room. Someone had gotten into the building without triggering any alarms, bypassed all the security cameras except for camera 12, and was now moving around in a locked conference room. My training kicked in immediately. I radioed for backup and prepared to confront whoever was trespassing in the building. But as I reached for my radio, I realized something that sent ice-cold fear shooting through my veins. The sound of moving chairs was coming from multiple locations inside the room. Not one chair, but several chairs, all being moved simultaneously in what sounded like people taking their seats around the conference table. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss any supernatural content, because what I witnessed next challenged everything I thought I knew about reality. I unlocked the conference room door as quietly as possible and slowly pushed it open. The room was empty. 20 chairs around the table exactly as I'd left them, with no sign that anyone had been moving them around. But the air in that room felt different now. Not just cold, but heavy, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. I stepped inside and checked every corner, every possible hiding place. Nothing. I examined the chairs carefully, looking for any sign they'd been recently moved. The carpet showed no scuff marks, no displaced furniture, yet I had clearly heard multiple chairs being repositioned just moments before. As I stood in the center of that empty conference room, trying to make sense of what I'd heard, the door behind me slammed shut. The sound echoed through the room like a gunshot, and I spun around to grab the handle. The door was locked. From the inside, with the key I'd used to open it still in my pocket, the door had somehow locked itself, trapping me inside the conference room. My radio crackled to life with Jim's voice. "Mark, are you there? I got your backup request, but dispatch shows all building sensors normal. What's your status?" I keyed the radio with shaking hands. "I'm locked inside the conference room on 15. The door just shut by itself and now I can't get out." "Use your key," Jim's voice came back, practical and calm. "I am using my key. It's not working. The lock mechanism isn't responding." There was a pause before Jim replied. "Stay calm. I'm sending a maintenance tech to your location. He'll be there in 30 minutes. 30 minutes alone in a room where chairs moved by themselves and doors locked on their own." I settled into one of the conference chairs to wait, keeping my flashlight ready and my radio close. The room was silent now, but I had the distinct feeling that I wasn't alone. That's when I noticed something that made my blood freeze in my veins. On the whiteboard at the front of the room, written in what appeared to be condensation or fog, were the words, "We've been waiting." Comment below what you think was really happening in that building, because the security cameras were about to capture something that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I stared at those words on the whiteboard, my mind racing to find a logical explanation. Condensation could form letters if someone had written on the board earlier with their finger, leaving invisible oils that became visible when moisture collected. But the building's climate control system maintained constant temperature and humidity. There was no reason for condensation to form, especially not in the shape of a coherent message. I took a photo of the whiteboard with my phone, then tried the door again. Still locked. I examined the lock mechanism more closely and discovered something impossible. The deadbolt was engaged, but it was a deadbolt that could only be turned from the outside of the room. Someone would have had to lock me in from the hallway, then disappear without being seen by any of the security cameras. My radio crackled again. This time it was a different voice. Tom, the maintenance tech. Mark, I'm in the building. Where exactly are you? 15th floor, Henderson and Associates conference room. The door locked itself and I can't get out. On my way up. While I waited for Tom, I decided to test something. I walked over to the whiteboard and breathed on it heavily, creating a small cloud of condensation on the surface. As I watched, the moisture evaporated quickly in the climate-controlled air, leaving no trace. Whatever had created those words, it wasn't normal condensation. 5 minutes later, I heard Tom's voice outside the door. Mark, you in there? Yeah, I'm here. Can you get this door open? I heard him trying the handle, then the sound of keys jingling. That's weird, he called through the door. The lock isn't engaged from out here. Try your handle again. I turned the handle, and the door opened immediately. Tom stood in the hallway, looking confused. Door seems fine to me. What happened? I stepped out of the conference room, grateful to be free but completely baffled. It was locked from the inside somehow. The deadbolt was engaged. Tom examined the door mechanism, testing the lock several times. This type of lock can't engage from the inside, he said. It's a security feature. Someone would have to lock it from the hallway. That's impossible. I was alone in the room. Tom shrugged. Maybe the lock mechanism stuck temporarily. These older buildings can have weird issues with their hardware. After Tom left, I went back to my security station with more questions than answers. I pulled up the camera footage from the 15th floor, expecting to see Tom unlocking the door and freeing me from the conference room. But what I saw in the recorded footage made absolutely no sense. According to the cameras, I had never been locked in the room at all. The footage showed me entering the conference room, standing inside for about 15 minutes, then walking out on my own. There was no sign of the door slamming shut, no indication that I'd been trapped inside, and no record of Tom coming to help me. The timestamp showed continuous recording with no gaps, but it depicted a completely different version of events than what I had experienced. Share this video with someone who loves horror stories, because what happened next proved that the building's security cameras were recording things that shouldn't exist. I sat at my desk, staring at the monitors and trying to process what was happening. Either the security system was malfunctioning in ways that defied technical explanation, or something supernatural was occurring in the Meridian building. Both possibilities terrified me, but I was starting to lean toward the supernatural explanation. At 2:30 a.m., cameras on 3 different floors detected motion simultaneously. I switched to manual control and began cycling through the affected cameras. The 7th floor showed what appeared to be a figure walking down the main hallway, too far from the camera to make out details, but definitely humanoid in shape. The 12th floor camera captured someone entering the elevator bank, but when I switched to the elevator cameras, they were all empty. The 18th floor showed a person standing at the window in the break room, silhouetted against the city lights. According to the building access logs, I was still the only authorized person inside the Meridian building. I grabbed my radio and called for immediate backup, then headed for the elevator to investigate the 18th floor first. As the elevator climbed, I tried to stay calm and think rationally. Maybe the building's security had been compromised. Maybe someone had found a way to disable the access logging system while keeping the cameras functional. Maybe there were unauthorized people in the building, and this was a serious security breach rather than a paranormal encounter. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. The elevator doors opened on the 18th floor, revealing an empty hallway illuminated by emergency lighting. I made my way to the break room where the camera had detected someone standing at the window. The room was vacant, but something was very wrong with the atmosphere. The air felt thick and electrically charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. I approached the window where the figure had been standing, and what I saw outside made my legs weak with terror. Reflected in the window glass wasn't my own face looking back at me, but the face of someone else entirely. A woman with hollow eyes and pale skin, staring at me with an expression of infinite sadness. The reflection moved independently of my movements, tilting its head as I stepped backward in shock. Let me know if you want me to continue investigating this further, because what the security cameras captured next would provide undeniable proof that the Meridian building was home to something that defied all natural laws. I spun around, expecting to find someone standing behind me, but the break room was empty. When I looked back at the window, my own reflection stared back normally, I stood there for several minutes, testing the reflection by moving my arms and head, but everything appeared normal now. My radio buzzed with Jim's voice. "Mark, backup is 10 minutes out. What's your current status?" "I'm investigating motion detections on multiple floors. Haven't found any unauthorized personnel yet, but something's definitely not right in this building. Stay safe and wait for backup before confronting anyone." I left the break room and headed back toward the elevator, but as I passed the main conference room on the 18th floor, I heard something that stopped me cold. The sound of a meeting in progress. Multiple voices talking quietly, chairs creaking, papers rustling. The unmistakable audio of people conducting business. The conference room door was closed, but light was visible underneath. According to the building directory, this room belonged to Morrison Legal Group, and they definitely weren't holding meetings at 3 a.m. I approached the door quietly and pressed my ear against it. The voices became clearer. I could hear what sounded like a woman presenting quarterly reports, a man asking questions about budget allocations, and several people discussing project timelines. It was a perfectly normal business meeting, except for the fact that it was happening in the middle of the night in a supposedly empty building. I tried to look through the frosted glass window in the door, but I could only make out vague shapes and shadows moving around inside the room. The silhouettes suggested at least 6 or 7 people seated around a conference table. My hands were shaking as I reached for the door handle. Every instinct told me to wait for backup, but I was a security guard and this was my building to protect. I turned the handle slowly and pushed the door open just a crack. The conference room was completely empty and dark. No people, no meeting, no lights, no sound. Just an empty room with chairs pushed neatly under the table and nothing out of place. But I had heard those voices clearly just seconds before opening the door. The meeting sounds hadn't faded away gradually. They had simply stopped existing the moment I opened the door. I stepped inside and flipped on the lights. The room looked exactly like every other conference room in the building. Professional, clean, and absolutely vacant. But on the whiteboard at the front of the room, written in the same condensation-style lettering I'd seen earlier, was a message that made my heart pound with terror. The night shift never ends. Hit that like button if this story is giving you chills, because the security cameras were about to record the most terrifying paranormal activity I've ever witnessed. I took another photo with my phone, then immediately called Jim on my radio. "Jim, I need you to access the security footage from camera 22 on 18. Tell me what you see in the Morrison Legal conference room right now." There was a pause as Jim pulled up the camera feed from his home office. "I see you standing in an empty conference room with the lights on. Why? What did you see 5 minutes ago before I entered this room?" Another pause, longer this time. "Let me check the recorded footage. Mark, 5 minutes ago that room was completely dark and empty. There's no record of any activity in there." I stared at the message on the whiteboard, knowing that Jim couldn't see it through the camera. Whatever was happening in the Meridian building existed in a space between reality and recording, visible to human senses, but invisible to digital surveillance. "Jim, I'm experiencing some kind of technical malfunction with the cameras. I'm seeing and hearing things that aren't showing up in the footage." "What kind of things?" Before I could answer, every light on the 18th floor went out simultaneously, plunging me into complete darkness. Emergency lighting should have kicked in immediately, but it didn't. I was standing in absolute blackness in the middle of a conference room, with only my flashlight to guide me. That's when I heard them again, the voices from the meeting. But this time they weren't muffled by a closed door. They were in the room with me, surrounding me in the darkness. I could hear chairs scraping against the floor as people took their seats, papers shuffling as documents were distributed, and quiet conversations as the meeting began. I fumbled for my flashlight and clicked it on, sweeping the beam around the room. Nothing. Empty chairs, bare table. No sign of the people whose voices I could hear clearly. But the voices continued, discussing quarterly projections and budget allocations as if I wasn't there. My radio crackled with Jim's voice, distorted by static. "Mark, can you... Backup is... building..." The radio signal was breaking up, but I could make out that backup was in the building somewhere. I headed for the door, guided by my flashlight, but as I reached for the handle, something grabbed my wrist. I couldn't see what was holding me, but I could feel fingers wrapped around my arm, cold, firm, and completely real. The grip tightened as I tried to pull away, and a voice whispered directly in my ear, "Stay for the meeting." Comment below what you think was happening to me in that building, because what occurred next would be captured by every security camera in the building simultaneously, creating paranormal evidence that couldn't be denied or explained away. I yanked my arm free and stumbled toward the door, my flashlight beam dancing wildly across the walls. Behind me, the meeting voices grew louder and more insistent, as if the participants were upset that I was leaving. I could hear chairs being pushed back and footsteps following me across the conference room floor. I reached the door and grabbed the handle, but it wouldn't turn. Just like in the 15th floor conference room, I was trapped inside with something that shouldn't exist. But this time, I wasn't alone with silence. I was trapped with the sounds of people who weren't there. My flashlight beam swept across the room one more time, and in that brief illumination, I saw something that will haunt me forever. The conference room wasn't empty anymore. Translucent figures sat around the table, their faces pale and indistinct, dressed in business attire from what appeared to be several different decades. Some wore suits from the 1980s, others in more modern clothing, but all of them were staring directly at me with hollow, dark eyes. The figures didn't move or speak, but I could still hear the meeting voices continuing their discussion. It was as if I was witnessing two different versions of reality simultaneously, one where the room was empty except for disembodied voices, and another where ghostly figures sat in eternal conference. My radio burst to life with clear reception. "Mark, where are you? We're in the building. 18th floor, Morrison Legal Conference Room. I'm trapped inside. On our way!" I pressed my back against the door and waited, keeping my flashlight trained on the spectral figures around the conference table. They remained motionless, but their eyes followed my every movement. The meeting voices continued their business discussion, occasionally mentioning projects and deadlines from years past, as if time had no meaning in this room. 2 minutes later, I heard running footsteps in the hallway outside, and Jim's voice calling my name. The door handle turned easily from the outside, and suddenly I was free, stumbling out into the hallway where Jim and 2 other security guards were waiting. "What happened?" Jim asked, steadying me as I caught my breath. I looked back into the conference room. The lights were on, the room was empty, and there was no sign of the paranormal meeting I'd just witnessed. The whiteboard was clean, with no trace of the condensation message. "There were people in there," I said, knowing how crazy it sounded. "Having a meeting." I could hear them talking, and I saw them sitting around the table. Jim exchanged glances with the other guards. "Mark, we've been monitoring all the cameras. That room has been empty all night. Are you feeling okay?" But as we stood in the hallway discussing what I'd experienced, something happened that validated everything I'd been through. Every security camera in the Meridian building simultaneously detected motion on every single floor. All 48 cameras triggered their motion sensors at exactly the same time, creating a building-wide alert that had never occurred before in the history of the security system. Jim's radio exploded with reports from the monitoring center downtown. "All stations, Meridian building is showing comprehensive motion detection across all floors. Possible system malfunction or major security breach." Jim pulled out his phone and accessed the live camera feeds. What he saw made his face go white with shock. Every single camera in the building was showing the same thing. Figures moving through the hallways, entering offices, and conducting what appeared to be normal business activity. But these weren't solid living people. They were translucent forms that seemed to exist just at the edge of visibility, like shadows given human shape. Share your own paranormal experiences in the comments section, because what we witnessed next proved that the Meridian building had been hosting supernatural tenants for far longer than anyone realized. "This is impossible," Jim whispered, scrolling through camera after camera on his phone. "The building access logs show only authorized personnel, but every floor is showing activity." I looked over his shoulder at the phone screen, watching ghostly figures walk through walls and conduct meetings in rooms that had been locked for hours. The supernatural activity wasn't limited to the floors I'd investigated. It was happening throughout the entire building, as if my presence had somehow awakened or activated something that had been dormant. One of the backup guards, a veteran named Rodriguez, was monitoring his own radio for updates from other security teams around the city. "I'm getting reports from 3 other buildings in the downtown area," he said grimly, "all showing similar camera malfunctions or unexplained motion detection." "It's not a malfunction," I said quietly. "I've been interacting with these entities all night. They're real, but they exist in some kind of parallel space that the cameras can sometimes detect and sometimes can't." Jim looked at me with a mixture of concern and professional skepticism. "Mark, you've been under a lot of stress tonight. Maybe we should get you checked out by a paramedic." "Then explain the cameras," I challenged him. "Explain why every single motion detector in the building is showing activity right now." Before Jim could respond, all the lights in the hallway began flickering in sequence, starting from the elevator bank and moving toward us like a wave of electrical disturbance. The fluorescent fixtures dimmed and brightened in a pattern that seemed almost like communication. 3 short flashes, 3 long flashes, 3 short flashes again. SOS, Rodriguez said quietly. That's SOS in Morse code. The light pattern repeated 3 times, then stopped. In the silence that followed, we could hear something that raised the hair on our necks. Footsteps echoing from the stairwell, moving up toward our floor. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, like someone climbing the stairs in boots or hard-soled shoes. But according to the stairwell cameras, which Jim was frantically checking on his phone, the stairs were completely empty. "We need to evacuate the building," Jim said decisively. "Something is seriously wrong here, and I'm not risking anyone's safety to figure out what." As we headed toward the elevator, I looked back one more time at the Morrison legal conference room. Through the glass window in the door, I could see the translucent figures still seated around the table, still conducting their eternal meeting. One of them, the pale woman I'd seen reflected in the 18th floor window, turned her head and looked directly at me. She raised her hand in what might have been a wave goodbye, or perhaps a gesture telling me to stay. I'll never know which, because at that moment, the elevator doors opened and Jim pulled me inside. As we descended toward the lobby, the elevator stopped on every single floor without anyone pressing the buttons. On each floor, the doors would open to reveal empty hallways filled with the sound of normal office activity, typing, phone conversations, copy machines running, people walking around, but no visible source for any of the sounds. 15th floor, the elevator announced in its automated voice, and the doors opened to show the Henderson and Associates hallway where my night of supernatural encounters had begun. The conference room door was standing wide open again, and I could see shadows moving inside. "We've been waiting," I whispered, remembering the message on the whiteboard. "What?" Jim asked. "Nothing. Just something one of them told me." The elevator continued its descent, stopping at floors 12, 9, 7, and 3, each time revealing the sounds of phantom office workers going about their business in spaces that had been empty for hours. By the time we reached the lobby, all 3 of us were shaken by what we'd experienced. Let me know if you want a part 2 to this story, because what we discovered about the Meridian Building's history would explain everything we'd witnessed and reveal why the security cameras were the only things capable of documenting the supernatural workforce that clocked in every night after the living employees went home. We stood in the lobby, gathering our thoughts and trying to process what had just happened. Jim was on his phone with the building management company, trying to explain a situation that sounded insane even as he described it. Rodriguez was reviewing the recorded footage on his tablet, shaking his head in disbelief at what the cameras had captured. "Look at this," Rodriguez said, showing us a recording from the 7th floor. "Watch the timestamp. 3:15 a.m., camera shows empty hallway. 3:16 a.m., translucent figures walking through the corridor. 3:17 a.m., back to empty hallway. The figures aren't there for exactly 60 seconds, then they disappear. Same pattern on every floor," Jim confirmed, ending his phone call. "Building management is sending an emergency technical team to investigate the security system. They think we're dealing with some kind of electronic malfunction that's creating false images on the cameras. But I knew better. What we'd witnessed wasn't a technical glitch. It was evidence of something supernatural that had been happening in the Meridian Building every night, probably for years. The security cameras were simply the first technology sensitive enough to document it." "Jim," I said, "I need to tell you something important. Before tonight, I never believed in ghosts or paranormal activity. But what I experienced up there wasn't imagination or stress hallucinations. Those entities interacted with me directly. They locked doors, wrote messages, grabbed my arm, and conducted meetings that I could hear clearly. The cameras are just confirming what I already knew. This building is haunted." Jim looked at me with the expression of someone trying to balance professional skepticism with the evidence of his own senses. "Let's say you're right," he said slowly. "Let's say this building has some kind of supernatural activity. Why is it happening now? You've been working here for 8 months without any problems." It was a good question, and I had been thinking about that question since we left the building, and I finally had a theory that chilled me to the bone. "I think," I said slowly, "that the supernatural activity has always been happening here, but tonight was different because I actually acknowledged it. I didn't just dismiss the first door opening as a mechanical failure. I investigated it. I engaged with whatever is in this building, and that engagement made me visible to them." Rodriguez nodded grimly, "Like tuning into a radio frequency. Once you're on the right wavelength, you can hear the signal." "Exactly. And now that they know I can see them, they're showing themselves more openly." Jim's phone buzzed with a text message. He read it, and his expression grew even more serious. Building management just sent me the historical records for the Meridian building. Mark, you need to hear this. Share this video with anyone who's ever worked a night shift alone, because what we discovered about the building's history would explain everything we'd witnessed and reveal a pattern of supernatural activity that had been documented for decades. Jim pulled up the building records on his phone and began reading. The Meridian Corporate Center was built in 1987 on the site of the old Metropolitan Hotel, which burned down in 1986. But here's the interesting part. There were 17 documented deaths in that hotel fire, and most of them occurred during the overnight hours when people were asleep. 17 deaths, I repeated, remembering the multiple voices I'd heard in the conference rooms. But it gets worse, Jim continued. Since the Meridian building opened, there have been consistent reports from night shift workers, security guards, cleaning crews, maintenance staff, all describing similar paranormal encounters. The building management company has been quietly replacing security personnel every few months because people keep quitting after experiencing unexplained phenomena during overnight shifts. Rodriguez pulled out his own phone and started searching. I'm looking up news reports about the Metropolitan Hotel fire. Here we go. 17 dead in downtown hotel blaze. Fire started on 18th floor during business conference. The article says a group of corporate executives were holding an emergency late-night meeting when an electrical fire broke out in the conference room. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. The 18th floor conference room where I'd heard the phantom meeting, the voices discussing quarterly reports and budget allocations, the translucent figures seated around the table, they weren't random supernatural entities. They were the victims of the hotel fire, eternally trapped in their final meeting. What about the other floors? I asked. I experienced activity throughout the building. Jim scrolled through more records. The hotel had corporate offices on multiple floors. According to this, there were people working late in various businesses throughout the building when the fire started. Some died from smoke inhalation in the stairwells trying to escape. Others were trapped in elevators that stopped working, and several were found in their offices, apparently overcome by smoke while trying to finish their work. They're still trying to finish their work, I said quietly. That's why the supernatural activity happens during business hours, overnight business hours. They don't know they're dead. They're still showing up for their eternal night shift. Let me know in the comments if you've ever experienced supernatural activity at your workplace, because what happened next would prove that acknowledging the presence of these entities had consequences that extended far beyond one night. As we stood in the lobby discussing the building's tragic history, something started happening that none of us were prepared for. Every electronic device in the lobby began activating simultaneously. The elevator buttons started lighting up in sequence. The security monitors flickered on and off, and the building's PA system crackled to life with the sound of static. But through the static, we could hear voices. Dozens of voices, all talking at once. It sounded like every phantom meeting in the building was being broadcast through the speakers simultaneously. Marketing presentations mixed with legal discussions, budget meetings overlapped with project planning sessions, and through it all, we could hear the underlying sound of panic and confusion as the voices seemed to realize that something was wrong. "We need to get out of here," Jim said. But as he reached for the lobby doors, they wouldn't open. The electronic locks had engaged automatically, trapping us inside the building with whatever supernatural presence we'd awakened. The elevator doors opened on their own, revealing not an empty car, but the translucent figure of a woman in a business suit from the 1980s. She stepped out of the elevator and walked directly toward us, her hollow eyes fixed on mine with an expression of desperate pleading. "Please," she said, her voice echoing as if coming from a great distance. "Help us understand. We've been trying to finish the Peterson account for so long, but we can't remember what happened to the rest of the meeting." More figures began emerging from the elevator, the stairwells, and even walking through the lobby walls. Men and women in business attire from different decades, all with the same confused, lost expression. They gathered around us, not threatening but desperate for answers. Rodriguez grabbed my arm. "Mark, they're drawn to you. You're the first person who's been able to see them clearly and interact with them. They want you to help them." "Help them do what?" I asked, though I was beginning to understand. The woman who had spoken first reached out toward me, her translucent hand stopping just inches from my face. "Help us remember," she whispered. "Help us understand what happened that night. We were in the middle of something important. And then everything went dark. But we're still here, still trying to work, still trying to finish what we started. Comment below what you think I should have done in this situation, because my next decision would determine whether these lost souls could finally find peace or remain trapped in their supernatural office building forever. I looked around at the gathering of ghostly figures, all of them staring at me with expressions of hope and desperation. They weren't malevolent entities trying to harm the living. They were confused souls who had died so suddenly that they didn't understand their own death. They were stuck in an endless loop, trying to complete work that would never be finished, attending meetings that would never conclude. "The fire," I said gently, addressing the woman who had spoken. "There was a fire on the 18th floor. It was 1986, and you were all working late when the building caught fire. You didn't make it out." The revelation rippled through the gathered spirits like a wave. Some of them looked down at themselves in confusion, as if seeing their translucent forms for the first time. Others began to flicker more intensely, their forms becoming less stable as the truth sank in. "We're dead?" the woman asked, her voice filled with a mixture of relief and sorrow. "Yes," I said. "You've been dead for almost 40 years, but you've been trapped here, reliving your final night over and over again because you died so suddenly that you never realized you had passed on." One of the male figures, a man in a 1990s suit, stepped forward. "I remember now," he said, his voice growing stronger. "The smoke alarm, the heat, the way the elevator stopped working. I was trying to get to the stairwell, but the smoke was so thick." "I was in the conference room," another voice added. "We were discussing the quarterly projections when the lights went out. I thought it was just a power failure, but then the smoke started coming under the door." As more of the spirits began to remember their deaths, something remarkable started happening. The building's supernatural energy began to shift. The electronic malfunctions stopped, the PA system fell silent, and the oppressive atmosphere that had been building all night started to lift. But the most amazing change was in the spirits themselves. As they accepted the truth of their deaths, they began to glow with a soft, warm light that seemed to come from within. The confusion and desperation in their faces was replaced with understanding and, gradually, peace. Hit the like button if you believe in helping lost souls find peace, because what happened next was the most beautiful and terrifying thing I've ever witnessed. The woman who had first spoken to me smiled for the first time, and in that smile, I could see her as she had been in life, vibrant, intelligent, dedicated to her work. "Thank you," she said. "We've been so lost, so confused. We knew something was wrong, but we couldn't understand what it was. You've given us the truth we needed to move on." "But how do we move on?" asked another spirit, a young man who couldn't have been more than 25 when he died. "We've been here so long, we don't know how to leave." I thought about everything I'd learned about death and the afterlife, both from personal experience and from the paranormal encounters I'd heard about from other security guards over the years. "You have to let go," I said. "Let go of the work. Let go of the unfinished business. Let go of the need to complete what you started. Your work here is done. You don't need to finish the Peterson account or complete the quarterly projections. You need to look for the light and move toward whatever comes next." As I spoke, a change began to occur in the lobby. The air itself seemed to shimmer, and I could see what appeared to be doorways of light beginning to form around the edges of the room. The spirits saw them too, and their faces filled with wonder and recognition. "I can see it," the woman whispered. "I can see the way forward." One by one, the spirits began walking toward the doorways of light. As each one passed through, they turned back to look at me one final time. Some waved goodbye, others nodded their thanks, and a few simply smiled with expressions of profound gratitude. The young man who had asked about moving on was one of the last to leave. "Will you remember us?" he asked as he approached his doorway of light. "Always," I promised. "I'll remember that you were here, that you mattered, and that you were finally able to find peace." He smiled and stepped through the light, disappearing into whatever lies beyond this world. Share your own experiences with helping others find closure in the comments below, because the aftermath of this supernatural encounter would change my entire perspective on life, death, and the responsibilities we have to each other. When the last spirit had passed through their doorway of light, the lobby returned to normal. The electronic locks disengaged, the lights stabilized, and the oppressive atmosphere that had filled the building all night was completely gone. It felt like a weight had been lifted not just from the building, but from reality itself. Jim, Rodriguez, and I stood in stunned silence for several minutes, processing what we had just witnessed. The security cameras throughout the building showed normal, empty hallways for the first time all night. The motion detectors had stopped triggering, and all the electronic systems were functioning normally. "Did that really happen?" Rodriguez asked quietly. The cameras recorded everything, Jim said, checking his phone. Every moment of what just occurred is documented in the security system. We have video evidence of spirits passing through doorways of light in this lobby. I walked over to the spot where the woman had first appeared and knelt down. On the marble floor, barely visible unless you knew to look for it, was a small scorch mark, probably from the original hotel fire almost 40 years ago. It was a physical reminder that the Metropolitan Hotel had once stood here, and that real people had died in a real tragedy. "What do we do with this information?" I asked Jim. "Who's going to believe us?" Jim was quiet for a long moment, then said, "I think the more important question is, what do we do with the responsibility we've been given? You helped those souls find peace, Mark. You were chosen for this role for a reason." Over the following weeks, I researched every detail I could find about the Metropolitan Hotel fire. I learned the names of all 17 victims, their ages, their occupations, and the circumstances of their deaths. I visited their graves when possible, and I made sure their story was properly remembered and honored. But more importantly, I realized that my experience at the Meridian building had opened my eyes to a world that exists alongside our own. A world of lost souls, unfinished business, and people who need help crossing over to whatever comes next. Let me know in the comments if you believe some people are chosen to help spirits find peace, because what I discovered about my own abilities would lead to many more supernatural encounters in the months that followed. I continued working as a security guard, but with a new understanding of what the job really entailed. I wasn't just protecting buildings from human intruders. I was often the only person present when supernatural entities needed help moving on from this world. Over the next 6 months, I encountered spirits in 3 other buildings. Each time, the pattern was similar. Lost souls trapped by sudden death, unfinished business, or simply confusion about their own passing. And each time, I was able to help them understand their situation and find the peace they needed to move forward. I learned that spirits are drawn to people who can see them clearly and interact with them without fear. My experience at the Meridian building had somehow activated this ability in me, making me a bridge between the world of the living and the world of the dead. The building management company never officially acknowledged what had happened that night, but they did make some interesting changes. They installed a memorial plaque in the lobby honoring the victims of the Metropolitan Hotel fire, and they established a policy of having security guards work in pairs during overnight shifts. They also upgraded their employee assistance program to include counseling for staff who experienced unusual stress during night shifts. Most importantly, the supernatural activity at the Meridian building stopped completely after that night. The spirits had found their peace, and the building became just another office complex. No more phantom meetings, no moving shadows, no doors opening on their own. But the impact of that night extended far beyond one building. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss more true paranormal stories, because my newfound ability to help lost spirits would soon lead me to the most challenging supernatural encounter of my career. 6 months after the Meridian building incident, I received a call from Jim asking if I'd be willing to take on a special assignment. A historic theater downtown had been experiencing severe supernatural activity that was disrupting renovation work. Construction crews were refusing to work there after multiple encounters with aggressive spirits, and the building's owners were desperate for help. They specifically requested you, Jim explained. Word has gotten around about what happened at the Meridian building. There are people in this city who know you have a unique ability to communicate with spirits and help them find peace. I accepted the assignment, knowing that I had been given this ability for a reason. If I could help more lost souls find their way to whatever comes after death, then I had a responsibility to do so. The historic theater case would prove to be far more complex than the office building spirits. The theater had a century of history, multiple tragic deaths, and spirits from different time periods who had become territorial and aggressive toward the living. But that's another story for another time. What I learned from my experience at the Meridian building is that death isn't always the end of consciousness, and that some people die so suddenly or traumatically that they become lost between worlds. These spirits aren't usually malevolent. They're confused, frightened, and desperately in need of someone who can help them understand their situation and guide them toward peace. I also learned that some of us are chosen to serve as bridges between the world of the living and the world of the dead. This isn't a role I sought out or wanted, but it's a responsibility I've come to accept and even cherish. There's something profoundly meaningful about helping a lost soul find peace and move on to whatever comes next. Comment below if you've ever felt called to help others in ways that go beyond the normal scope of your job or daily life, because I believe we all have opportunities to serve as bridges for each other, whether in life or death. The night shift at the Meridian building taught me that we're never truly alone. even in the emptiest spaces. The world is full of consciousness and energy that extends far beyond what we can normally see or understand. Sometimes that energy is trapped, confused, or lost, and it needs someone with the ability to perceive it and the courage to engage with it. But it also taught me that love, compassion, and understanding are forces that transcend death itself. The spirits I encountered weren't evil or demonic. They were people who had once lived, worked, and cared about their responsibilities, just like all of us. They had simply become lost in the transition from life to death, and they needed someone to show them the way forward. Since that night, I've helped dozens of spirits find peace and move on. Each encounter has been different, but the basic elements remain the same: acknowledgement, understanding, and compassion. When we treat spirits as fellow conscious beings deserving of respect and help, rather than as frightening entities to be feared or dismissed, amazing things can happen. The security cameras at the Meridian building captured the most compelling paranormal evidence I've ever seen, but more importantly, they documented proof that death is not the end of consciousness, and that love and compassion can reach across the boundary between life and death to help lost souls find their way home. Subscribe for more documented paranormal encounters, and share your own supernatural experiences in the comments section, because I believe that sharing these stories helps people understand that the supernatural world isn't something to be feared, but rather something to be approached with respect, understanding, and an open heart. The security cameras that night recorded more than just paranormal activity. They documented the moment when 17 lost souls finally found the peace they had been seeking for almost 40 years. And they proved that sometimes the most important part of any job isn't in the official description, but in being willing to help others when they need it most, regardless of whether those others are among the living or the dead. That was my experience at the Meridian Corporate Center, and it's a night that changed my life forever. The security cameras captured what happens when no one is watching, but more importantly, they showed what can happen when someone is finally willing to truly see and help those who need it most. Thank you for watching, and remember, we're never truly alone, even in the darkest and emptiest places. Sometimes the most profound connections we make are with those who exist just beyond the edge of our normal perception, waiting for someone brave enough to acknowledge their presence and compassionate enough to help them find their way home. Hit the like button if this story gave you chills, subscribe for more true paranormal encounters, and let me know in the comments if you've ever experienced something that made you question what you thought you knew about life, death, and the mysterious world that exists between them. And remember, if you ever find yourself working alone at night and you sense that you're not truly alone, don't be afraid. Sometimes those presences are just lost souls who need someone to see them, acknowledge them, and help them find the peace they've been searching for. Sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply be willing to listen, understand, and care about the experiences of others, whether they're among the living or caught somewhere in between. The next time you're in an empty building after hours, and you hear footsteps in an empty hallway or see shadows moving where no one should be, remember the spirits of the Meridian building, and consider that what you're experiencing might not be something to fear, but rather someone reaching out for help, understanding, and the simple human kindness that can guide a lost soul toward the light of whatever comes next. That's the real lesson the security cameras taught me that night, that our capacity for compassion and understanding doesn't end with death, and that sometimes the most important work we do is helping others find peace, whether they're among the living or among those who have passed on but haven't yet found their way home.